Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good mornings, all participants of the, what do you call it here, the program? International Weeks. It's honorable for me invited to this class to give a kind of lecture, share our knowledge and experience about the ASEAN, especially in the political and security aspects of the ASEAN. It's quite interesting, this program is kind of parallel with the other similar program, the next building. The difference only in the topics. The topics there, what you call it, digitalizing ASEAN community of the youth in the ASEAN. Yeah, so I think this is good. I don't know how many participants. I heard it's more than 50, and from how many countries? 5 countries. All right, now let me talk about and discuss about the political ASEAN political and security community. Well, this is one of the pillars of the 3 pillars of ASEAN. As you know, we have ASEAN have 3 pillars. The first one, ASEAN political and security community. The second one is ASEAN economic community. And the third one, ASEAN social and cultural community. So these pillars is one of the most important one because the argument is it is almost impossible for us to develop a kind of ASEAN community in the other pillars like a social, economic community without any security guarantees, in region. So we need to talk about this. So this is why I think ASEAN in 2015 decided to realizing what's called the ASEAN political and security community. Next. So ASEAN security community, what is it? Security is the absence of violence and threats of violence. But of course, we are not talking about the what's so-called traditional security, right? There are another aspect of security, and then this is not this topic actually, what's so-called non-traditional security. Now let me talk about the security in relation to what's so-called the concept of traditional security. Acharya defines a community as a group with a shared identity and common norms. According to Gadjah, for example, security community is a group of people with reasonable expectation for lasting peaceful change. That is, the resolutions of the dispute by peaceful means. You have to keep in mind that the security is something, a kind of relational phenomenon. Means, to understand, to know about the security of one country, you have to know the other security, the degree of the security of the other countries as well. So if you talk about, let's say, the security of Indonesia, and then we have to talk about also and relates this kind of security to the Malaysia, for example, China, Thailand, maybe Philippines, and so on, right? So relational phenomenon. And also, to some extent, security also can be dynamic and also relative. Means secure for one country can be not necessarily, secure for the other countries. So the degree can be different, It depends on the perception, the conceptualization of the security of the one country. Okay. So normally, security community are marked by institutionalized procedures without resort to large-scale physical force. People in security community are bound by the sense of community. It's community, So security community, unlike, let's say, the security bloc, like NATO, for example, it's different, right? Security more on the laws institutions, So bound by sense of community, feelings that we are, part of the community. The mutual sympathy, trust, and common interest among the members of the community. This is the very fundamental character of the community, including the security community. So ASEAN defined the community as a connect of Southeast Asian nations, outward-looking, living in peace, stability, and prosperity, bonded together in partnership in dynamic development and in a community of caring society. If you read this argument or the statement, it seems to be more normative. But that's the yes, that's true. This is the norms, right, of the ASEAN in relation to the security community. This is the norm basis for the ASEAN security community. This is the origin of the ASEAN political and security community. APSC is a road of a new concept. It was built on what has been constructed over the years in the field of political and security cooperation. If you have time, you have to read more about the history of the ASEAN. You know, they started from the, let's say, conflict among the nations in the region, especially between Indonesia and Malaysia. Have you heard about the Indonesian confrontation policy against Malaysia? Politik konfrontasi, pernah dengar? Have you heard about it? We fight against Malaysia at that time during the Sukarno era, right? In 1960s. So the ASEAN has been progressively developing the idea of the community among its members since the formation of ASEAN. But it takes quite a long time, you know, to realize this kind of idea, simply because the the diversity of the countries in the ASEAN, Southeast Asian regions, and also the establishment of ASEAN cannot be separated from the world politics at the times during the Cold War era. So although the Bangkok Declaration with the ASEAN makes no explicit reference to political and security cooperation, for example, you have to remember again, when we established ASEAN under the ASEAN Charter, it's not really straightforward, to say about the political and security cooperation at the time. The focus of the ASEAN mainly on the social and cultural and the economics, aspects. Why? Simply because political and security is something so sensitive. In many other regional organizations, like in Europe, for example, if you look at the history of the European Union, also they started from the non-political and security issues. When they declared all the countries in Europe, for example, united together to become the European Union till now. So, but promoting regional peace and stability as well as cooperation on political and security issues has been an important aspect of the ASEAN cooperation since its founding in 1967. So, APSC reflects the idea that the maintenance and enhancements of peace, security, and stability, as well as the strengthening of peace-oriented values in region, are fundamental priorities of ASEAN. The spirit. Once again, if you look at the ASEAN Charter, there is no clear statements about, the original one, right? But the spirit, how to keep the security in region. So, ASEAN Political and Security Community is an effort by ASEAN to realize their belief in the critical importance of regional peace and stability to the long-term success of ASEAN community. This is legal and political instruments. Let's say, as I said before, Bangkok Declaration 1967. The aim is to strengthen existing regional bonds. It talks in terms of solidarity and cooperation, of equality and partnership in search of peace, progress, and prosperity. And then the second one, the basic document is the Bali Concord 1 in 1976, which is stated that member states shall vigorously develop awareness of regional identity and exert all effort to create a strong ASEAN community. So this is the original ideas about the ASEAN community actually, from the Bali Concord. The Bali Concord II successfully formalized and institutionalized the ASEAN community vision into concretely targeted community by 2020. But if you aware, then take more time, Finally, ASEAN countries, declare the ASEAN community in 2000, earlier before, 5 years earlier in 2015. ASEAN Charter, November 2007, source of basic norm of ASEAN political and security community, and many others actually in the document. The objective, the aims is to ensure that the countries in region live at peace with one another and with the world in a just, democratic, and harmonious environment. ASEAN cooperation in political development aims to strengthen and also democracy, enhance good governance and the rule of law, to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms, to create rules-based community of shared values and norms. So, in this context, security is viewed in the more comprehensive manners and with an increasing focus on peoples, rather than, as I said before, looking at the from the traditional security concept. As stated in the ASEAN Charter, for example, that one of the ASEAN purposes is the need to respond effectively in accordance with the principle of comprehensive security to all forms of threats, transnational crimes, and transboundary challenges. So these aspects is already a part of what's so-called the non-traditional security, which is now, if you look or read in the newspaper, for example, the fact is I think this is the most serious challenge for ASEAN countries' securities. Narcotics, illegal migrants, transboundary crime, and so on, including terrorism. So, shaping and sharing norm. In the shaping and sharing of norm, ASEAN aims to achieve a standard of common inherent to norms of good conduct among member states of the ASEAN community, consolidating and strengthening ASEAN solidarity, cohesiveness and harmony, and contributing to the building of peaceful, democratic, tolerant, participatory, and transparent community in the Southeast Asia. This is the norm. Approach. To achieve those objectives, the members of the community agreed to rely exclusively on the peaceful process and the settlement of intra-regional differences. So this is why, I have another slide actually talking about the ASEAN way, the way of ASEAN in manage the conflicts among the countries in the region, which is so much different with, let's say, what the international organization like UN, for example, manage. So it is a very interesting that ASEAN countries has what's so-called the ASEAN way. We can discuss it anyway later on about it. And regard their security as fundamentally linked to one another and bound by geographic locations, common vision, and objectives. Okay, next. The ASEAN Political and Security Community subscribes to a comprehensive approach to security which acknowledges the interwoven relationship of the political, economic, social, culture, environmental dimension of development. It promotes the renunciation of aggressions and of the threat or use of force or other action in any manner inconsistent with international law and reliance of peaceful settlement of disputes. Any one of you who know about some of the principles under the ASEAN way? No? One of them is non-interference, right? Non-interference. So this is why when what happened, for example, in Myanmar, there is no right for the other countries, the member of ASEAN, to intervene to the what so-called domestic affairs of the Myanmar. Yeah, that's some people say this is a good approach, but the others say it's not really good, in solving the problem in the Southeast Asia. Based on the existing instruments, it upholds existing ASEAN political instruments such as SOPAN, Zone of Peace and Freedom, this is from nuclear, and Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, TEC, and many other agreements among the ASEAN members, which play a pivotal role in area of confidence building measure, preventive diplomacy, and pacific approaches to conflict resolution. In the other slide, once again, I have a slide that can show you that in the ASEAN countries still exists what so-called the security dilemma, a kind of enmity side among the countries in ASEAN. So, on the one hand, we see that the ASEAN is one of the most successful regional organizations in the world in secure, right, the security situation or peaceful situation and environment in the region. But on the other side, a lot of experts, viewing that there's a problem of enmity. Enmity means kind of relationship characterized by suspicious, for example, right, distrust, jealous, and so on. You can see, for example, between Indonesia and Malaysia. In one hand, they need each other. They need to cooperate with each other and closely. But in the other hand, they still have a kind of problem, a kind of competition, and so on. In terms of territory dispute, for example, in Ambalat and many other. Malaysia and Philippines also got the problems. Malaysia and Thailand, Thailand and Cambodia, right? Vietnam and so on. So, yeah, but it's quite happy that ASEAN so far can manage the conflict not to become a kind of open, conflict. Let's say using a kind of violence. Okay. So, as the ASEAN Political and Security Community is built based on the ASEAN Charter, so that the main objective of ASEAN Political and Security Community is to realize the objective of the ASEAN as stated in its charter. It also seeks to address non-traditional security as well. This is the component. ASEAN Political and Security Community has 6 components: political development, shaping and sharing of norms, conflict prevention, this is a very important one, and conflict resolution as well, post-conflict peace building, and implementing mechanism. Now, why the first one is very important? Simply because as I said before, this security is kind of relational phenomenon, all right? Security of the region can be so much influenced by the domestic situations, let's say political security, the domestic of the ASEAN member countries. So, how important the development of political development in the one countries to contribute to the security of the region? Let's say what happened in Myanmar, couple of years ago till now, I think, when there was a problem in domestic politics in Myanmar, affects the security in the region. Let's say the flow of migrant refugees, from Myanmar to ASEAN countries, for example, and so on. Yeah. So, how important the political development? I think the ASEAN leaders, thinking about how to develop the political democratic political system in region. So what happened in Thailand, for example, it can be influence the stability and security in the ASEAN. Shaping and sharing of norms. There's kind of, as I said before, like the ASEAN way, for example, this is a kind of, we can say that this is a kind of great values among the ASEAN member countries, actually, because they think this is, in accordance with the characters of the political, social, and economics of the countries in region. Conflict preventions. This is one of the big issues, actually. Usually, they do it by, let's say, doing a kind of treaty agreement, for example, cooperation in including the technical things like joint exercise of the military between Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, and so on. Conflict resolution. We do have, as I said before, ASEAN way, but in the case of ASEAN ways, cannot solve the problems. And then usually we put this kind of case into the international organization, like the International Tribunal, for example, in case of Sipadan Ligitan, right? Post-conflict peace building, this is also important, and implementing the mechanism. This is the principle, put the importance of amity side, kind of principles, the expectation that the other country will help us, and so on, right? Trust, and so on. Respect for independence. This is the kind of principle of ASEAN way, actually, right? Respect for independence. So in ASEAN, it is a kind of taboo when one country, for example, interferes with the or to the other member state domestic affair. So that's why when there is a kind of political problem in Myanmar, for example, all member countries of the ASEAN should be wisely, acts on behalf of either individual state or individual of ASEAN. They are not allowed to intervene in this kind of issue. Also, when it happened in Indonesia during the reformasi era in 1997, no single ASEAN countries, will react, that indicate its intervention to Indonesian domestic affairs. Also, respect to sovereignty. Indonesia. This is one of the problems, about the sovereignty here, especially between Indonesia and Malaysia. Thailand and Cambodia. In terms of, I forgot the name of the temple there. It's a very old temple. They complain about the temple. Territorial integrity for Indonesian. This is the final words, and national identity, non-interference, consensus, and unity in diversity. Look at the last principle, consensus and unity in diversity. It's one of the problems as well. If you look at the case of the South China Sea issues, for example, right? You can see that there is no single position of the ASEAN member countries. Vietnam has their own policies, Indonesia different, Malaysia, Brunei, and Philippines. They have their own position and interest on it. But so it's not easy, for example, to voice a kind of, this is ASEAN, position, in the case of South China Sea. Simply because, as I said before, no single great perception or position on that issues differently, one country to another. So the consensus principles sometimes put problem among the 10 members of ASEAN countries when they, for example, put for one issues. If one single country did not agree, for example, or doesn't agree with the issue or the let's say the declaration or something, and then the ASEAN can do nothing. Yeah, consensus. Share commitment and collective responsibility, enhancing regional peace, security, and prosperity. It's a good now. During the Cold War, for example, we got a problem that one countries like Philippines, for example, accommodate the U.S. Marines, what do you call it, base in Subic, for example, right? But not now. So it is kind of realization of the SOPAN, as I said before. Now, we as ASEAN countries have to keep the region as a freedom and neutrality zones. Although that there's some member of ASEAN countries also the member or join what's so-called the APDA, Pipe Power Defense Arrangement. There's a kind of loose military pact, between Malaysia, Singapore, Australia, British, and New Zealand. Yeah. Non-aggression and non-use of force, no suppression and coercion, enhanced consultation on the matters socially affecting the common interests of the ASEAN, advancing rule of law, democracy, and constitutional government. But again, this is not easy. You see that ASEAN now have a kind of what's so-called the intergovernmental human rights, I forget, commission something, but it's not easy to implement the agreed principles on that kind of convention simply because of these principles, Respect for the different culture, language, and religion, but saying unity in diversity spirit, centrality of ASEAN, outward-looking, inclusive, and non-discrimination. Abstention from policy or activity which threaten the sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political and economic stability of ASEAN member states. So ASEAN recognizes the regional peace and stability cannot be fully attained without the constructive engagement of the important countries from outside Southeast Asia. This is the characteristics of ASEAN political security community. There are three characteristics. A role-based community of shared values and norms means that all of the country must be obey the norms that they agreed, especially as I said before about the ASEAN way or ASEAN values. Yeah. A cohesive, peaceful, stable, and resilient region with shared responsibility for comprehensive security, and dynamic and outward-looking region, and increasingly integrated interdependent world. Yeah. But again, the fact is, it's not as easier written in these documents. As I said before, the fact is some of the countries of the ASEAN member have a kind of closer, relationship in terms of security with the other, let's say, superpower countries. Let's say Philippines, much closer to U.S., while Singapore also U.S., Australia and British, Indonesia so much quite independent, but now close to Russia, China, and also United States and so on. So this is the blueprint. I think we can see here. You can read it more about it later on. This is the cooperation in political development. First, promote understanding and appreciation of political system, culture, and story of ASEAN member state. So the second one, facilitate free flow of information of mutual support and assistance among ASEAN member states. So have you heard about the Bali Democratic Forum? This is one of the implementations of this kind of principles, the effort of the ASEAN countries not to teaching or condemn of the one member countries when they got problem in the political system, but try to share the experience and information. sharing, process rather than like the other countries do. Hey, you are undemocratic countries, please change the government, do blah blah blah. No, this is not the in accordance with the ASEAN way. ASEAN way say, all right, just say, I think we can do something for you. Why don't you come to us and then we can discuss about many things, including, let's say, the political system. That's what Indonesia did, in relation to what happened to Myanmar. Yeah, political problem at the time. Strengthening the rule of law in judiciary system and legal infrastructure, although also it's not easy because again, among the 10 member countries of the ASEAN, they have their own legal systems and political systems, which is not, necessarily matched one another. Let's say Thailand have their own political systems, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, and so on, right? So the judiciary system and legal infrastructure, continental, for example, and so on. Those who studying about the law, for example, we understand more about the judiciary system in one countries like in the Indonesia or other countries of ASEAN. Promote good governance, like what happened in Indonesia, by establishing what's called the KPK, for example, and many other institutions that try to promote good governance. Promotion and protection of human rights. This is one of the problems, but it's quite interesting. Once again, as I said before, ASEAN has the principles of non-interference. On the other hand, we try to establish what's so-called the ASEAN Human Rights Body. Now already exists. The problem is how to implement the human rights principles into the daily political life, for example, social life and economic life. It's not easy, simply because there's a kind of, as I said before, non-interference. So if, for example, there's a kind of human rights violation in, let's say, Myanmar, so it's not easy for the member state countries like Indonesia, for example, to do something, to act, against the Myanmar government due to the principle of non-interference, as I said before. Increase the participation of relevant entities associated with the ASEAN. So many, like ASEAN business community might be, students and so on. Prevent and combat corruption. Promote principle of democracy. This is one again, so this is why a part of the effort of the ASEAN member countries to promote the principle of democracy by providing a forum, what's called the Bali Democratic Forums. Now it's quite one of the established political forum actually in the region. Promote peace and stability in region. Sharing norm. Adjust ASEAN institution framework to comply with the ASEAN Charter. As I said before, ASEAN Charter was formulated during the Cold War era, right? So the situation is really different. So this is why there are a lot of needs, to readjust, to amend the charters, in accordance with the current situation. Strengthening cooperation under the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in many aspects, not only in the security, political and security aspect, but also in social, cultural, and many other. Ensure full implementation of document for peace and stability in the South China Sea. Code of conduct, something, right? Code of conduct. Ensure the implementation of Southeast Asia nuclear weapon free zone. Till now, promote ASEAN maritime cooperation. One country or two countries in the region still openly accommodates, let's say, the nuclear weapon of the superpower countries, at least across the oceans of the Asean, Southeast Asian region. I'm not sure if you talk about the Singaporean, for example, have a kind of provide a kind of facilities for United States military what do you call it? Troops, to visit the countries. Promote ASEAN maritime cooperation. This is one of the important one, especially now. If you look at the maps of the ASEAN, the most serious challenges for the ASEAN security will become from the ocean, the sea. If you look, I have the actually, the map, especially the Malacca Straits, and then up to the South China Sea. This is one of the main lines, for let's say oil and gas, for example, transportations, and many other industrial products from Japan, Korea, to the East Asia. So the very important one, strategic position. So this is why ASEAN, especially Indonesia and other countries, what you call it, pays serious attention to the development of the South China Sea issues. Conflict prevention. This is really strengthen confidence building measure. Let's say by kind of diplomacy, including what's so called the public diplomacy. I'm not sure. This is a part of public diplomacy as well. I think so. At least among the young peoples, of the ASEAN member countries. Build up the necessary institutional framework for strengthening ASEAN Regional Forum, IRF, process in support the ASEAN political security community. Strengthen effort in maintaining respect for territorial integrity, sovereignty, and unity of ASEAN member states. Promote the development of norms that enhance ASEAN defense security cooperation, conflict resolution and Pacific settlement of dispute, post-conflict peace building, non-traditional security issues. As I said before, the fact is one of the most serious challenges for the ASEAN security is come from what's so-called the non-traditional security issues. Illegal migrant, refugee, trafficking, narcotics, and so on, right? ASEAN also have a kind of commitment to strengthen its partnership and cooperation with the external powers, but still, based on the strengthening ASEAN centrality in regional cooperation and community building. Promoting enhanced ties with external parties, like again in the European community, for example, right? United States and the Pacific, South Pacific, and so on. Strengthen consultation, cooperation, and multilateral issues of common concern. Already has basic rules, norm, and principle which has been applied relatively success. This is relevant of the ASEAN political and security community. The remaining potential of persistent military conflict in region, some conflict have not ended comprehensively and totally, just like between Philippines and Malaysia, for example, right? Once again, Thailand and Cambodia, still sometimes they spark the tensions, between the countries. ASEAN political security format is in accordance with the ASEAN way, non-provocative, avoiding security dilemma, peacefully, either for internal or external actors, increasing new challenges in political and security issues facing by ASEAN member states, including non-traditional security issues, transnational crime, terrorism, illegal migrant, etc. This is the challenges. Remaining inter and intra-conflict among member states, as I said before, if we to be frank, there's still a lot of problems in this conflict. In term, even this relates to the kind of strategic issues like territorial dispute, for example, between Indonesia and Malaysia, between Singapore and Malaysia, Indonesia and Singapore. So almost all members of the ASEAN countries has a kind of potential of the conflict. Domestic political development, some of the political situation of the domestic of the member of the ASEAN countries is not stable yet. Let's say we don't know, maybe in Myanmar is much better now, but couple of years or months ago in Thailand, sometimes we don't know about the Philippines as well. Who knows about Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore is alright maybe, I'm not sure, Brunei. Yeah, but some countries still facing the big problem in terms of how to stabilize the domestic political system. As I said before, increasing non-traditional security issues. This is one of the most challenges facing by the ASEAN. Lack of political will, commitment among member states to enforce the treaty norm principle, simply because if we look at the ASEAN countries, they are still, as I said before, enmity side, distrust, jealous, afraid of, suspicious, and so on. There still exists what so-called the narrow nationalisms among the ASEAN member state. So if you look at the principle of non-interference, for example, this is a kind of reflection of how strong the narrow nationalism. Like in Indonesia, if you're in Indonesia, they heard about the Indonesia adalah NKRI adalah harga mati, right? What is it in English? I'm not sure about that. Yeah, this is the final word. No bargains about the Indonesian territory and so on. Right? And then we talk about the sovereignty, but the sovereignty actually, cannot be understood in the current situation as a traditional sovereignty and the concept of the traditional sovereignty. There is no, I think, any more countries in the world which have a kind of 100% sovereignty. And the economic, for example, how come you claim that we have a kind of economic sovereignty while the price, the investment is so much different on what happened in New York, for example, right? On the Tokyo share market and so on. So domestic political development still is problems in the Southeast Asian countries. External power rivalries and competition also one of the serious problem as well. You see what happened in the South China Sea, for example, right? It's not solely simply this is the an overlapping claims by the claimant state like Philippines, Brunei, Vietnam, China, and so on. But this is the impact of the superpower rivalries in region, United States and China. So, we can look at these issues, by putting the issue from the framework of superpower or external power rivalries and competition in the region. Increasing non-traditional security, lack of political will, as I said before, again here, as a part of the still strong of the narrow nationalism among the countries in the ASEAN. This is critical view. Dispute implied the charter only cover conflict between and among ASEAN states and do not address internal conflict which are also significant in region. This is the problem with the ASEAN charter. Why? Simply because non-interference itself, right? Principle. While everybody knows what happened in one country can influence the regional security situation. Especially if any kind of social unrest, political unrest, and so on. You see, when there was a problem in Vietnam, Cambodia, right? Almost the country, not only in region but in the world, has to face a problem of the flow of the refugees, for example. One authenticity problem in monitoring ASEAN community building progress, particularly in the political security, is the lack of quantifiable targets. Again, if you look at the ASEAN Charter, for example, or Treaty of ASEAN Amity Cooperation, all of the statement actually normative. There is no clear indicator whether this kind of, for example, target or treaty or norm has been obeyed or not. Yeah? Seems to be too ambitious to some extent. If you look once again, with the principle of the ASEAN political security community, seems to be too ambitious, without considering carefully the dynamic of domestic and international political, social, and economic development. Let's say about the development of new norms now, what's so-called the cosmopolitanism, a kind of awareness among the global citizen how to become a good global citizen through the implementation of human rights, for example, environmental issues and many other. So the other is ASEAN security community. This is a good question. I think we can discuss about it, what is the answer is. But some people say not yet. While there has been no major war, but the militarized border dispute or conflict among member states still often occurs. As I said before, right? Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand to some extent, Thailand, Cambodia, and many more. All right, so that's for the first slide. I think I know the time is not too many, so I stop there. I hope this kind of the presentation can spark the discussions today. We have another 5 slides which is connected to this topic actually. Let's say the current situation in the region. As I said before, we are looking at the more details of the security structure or the political structure in region. Right, and also about the domestic and external factors that can influence the regional security environment. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the interesting lecture, Dr. Dafri Agussalim. Now we will open a question and answer session. For participants who want to raise questions, please raise your hand. Please state your name and your university before asking your questions.
My name is Refki. I'm from Universitas Gadjah, Mada. And I have a question, sir.
Yeah.
Actually, from what I read from the pre-assignment and from the internet is that conflicts between neighbor countries happen all the time, like what happened between Malaysia and Indonesia. And these two countries have been going at it since like the regime of President Sukarno, right?
Yeah.
And these conflicts happen particularly because of territorial disputes. So my question is how to implement the ASEAN political and security community when conflicts between its members happen all the time and will happen for years to come. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Karisma from Universitas Gadjah, Mada. I believe that one of the main problems to the Asian community is the narrow nationalism that you said before.
Yeah.
Is there anything that the Asian community has been doing to deal with this problem? And is there any punishment to a country that doesn't accommodate a peaceful community?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, my name is Kevin Wijaya. I'm from Atmajaya University. Related to the issues of the threats related to the political and security to the ASEAN, you mentioned that every countries and members in ASEAN try to prevent and combat the corruption.
Yeah.
This issue is never ends, and I think it was something interesting there. And I'm curious. Each member they try to combat, they try to fight with their corruption in their own government.
Yeah.
And can you share your opinions how another country, maybe another members except in Indonesia, can help our country to combat, to fight the corruption itself? Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for such a good questions. If I can conclude, actually, all of the questions, three questions, based on the one issues. That is about the narrow nationalism, as I said before. Narrow nationalism, some people say traditional nationalism and whatever. Yeah. Let's say the first question, for example, how to manage the conflict between countries, in the ASEAN, and then that always happen. Once again, conflict can be sparked by the many aspects, historical differences, for example, in the political systems, which is different one another, territorial dispute, even to some extent, according to the conflict history, from one country to another can involve in a kind of conflict, violence conflict, simply because a kind of what do you call it? Fighting against image, What do you call it? Harga diri? What do you call it? Pride, yeah? What is pride? Yeah, it's pride. So, look, you have to keep in mind in the world, or not, it's quite interesting, A country or a state, this is a kind of what's so-called living mechanism. One, it is established, and then it has its own interest. It's quite interesting that the state can then grow up, and then start, and then fall down, like what happened in history, like Rome, for example, Egypt, ancient Egypt, right? Maybe China's, ancient China's, British, for example, in modern history, So one country can, grow up and then, start, and then what happened to United States now? And people say, United States is still, what call it? Not only, I'm not saying to dying, but, trying to, while China is increasing to become the superpower. But one of the most character of the country is, what do you call it? Country may spread over, but there's no even single countries in the world which can accept the minimalize of the country itself in terms of territory, sovereignty, and so on. You can imagine here. Let's say one country like Indonesia, we do have how many islands that we have, More than 30,000 something, right? Do you think that the Indonesian will say, all right, that's enough? It's enough, because so many islands that we have already. Do you think so? No. If they have a chance, we need not one more or two more or 100, maybe 1,000 other islands. We are really hungry, about the territorial. You can imagine that, for example, the leader of Indonesia say one day, oh my God, this is too big, Indonesia. So anybody who like to take Sumatra, take it. No, right? And that kind of character can be, have by almost countries in the world. Even the single countries like Singapore, for example, they have a problem with territorial dispute, right? With Malaysia and Indonesia, right? A small island there. So this why when we talk about the conflict between countries here, right? There's a kind of adagium in the from the what's so-called realist perspective. Peace is a kind of what do you call it, you know? Time between the one war to another. This is the peace. War or conflict is something unavoidable, must be happen. The only effort that human being can do, how to, what do you call it, you know, broadening the space, you know, between one war to another. Let's say, anybody remember when the First World War happened? The First World War. And then when the Second World War happened, 39 something. So only, you know, less than 30 years, right? But the realists say, look, we are now, I mean, the state in the world, the country in the world, the nation is quite successfully in in lengthening the periods of peace, you know, between the Second World War till now. There's no World War III, all right? So this is the peace only. So if you ask me how to manage the conflict among the countries, I think the only thing is how to, again, you know, stop the conflict, but not solve the problem sometimes. This is, it's not easy. Yeah, stop the conflict. This is what happened between North Korea and South Korea. They just stopped the conflict, stopped the war, but not solve the problem yet, actually. The war's not finished yet. Yeah, they can recurrent, put it over. Now, how to solve the problem? By implementing kind of, again, you know, principle that they agree one another. Let's say, yes, the conflict is something natural in a human being. Once again, you know, according to the realist point of view, conflict is something natural. There is no single human being like us, you know, can be freedom from conflict. The only thing that we can do, that we have to do, is how to manage the conflict not to become the violent conflict. You see, conflicts always happen. If the conflict among the people like us always happen, then also as among the state, including the Asean countries. You might say, how come? Indonesia and Malaysia, for example, is one of the both nations is similar, have kind of similar historical background and so on, right? But they fight each other. So once again, you know, nationalism. Once you are, so this is why, you know, according to the establishment of states, sometimes it also means to put you in the different box, you know, with another. Once you are the citizen of Indonesia, mean they are another citizen of other countries, and then this is yours. It's not yours. The management of conflict sometimes, so this is why they need kind of what they call it, the common enemy, right? Common enemy. All right. So again, you know, one of the effort, this is related to the second question, is how to solve the problem or deal with the narrow nationalism, is by creating a common new identity. So that's the ASEAN, you know, when they talk about the ASEAN security community, ASEAN social community, ASEAN economic community, that's a kind of effort actually, you know, to create a kind of new identity, ASEAN identity. Unfortunately, you know, if you do a kind of research, for example, questioning to the young people, you know, in Indonesia, Thailand, Cambodia, asking them, and then, do you know about ASEAN? I think 70% of the young people is not really understands about what is ASEAN, what's the, you know. So ASEAN is still so much elitist, Only the people like us who knows about ASEAN. So this is why this program and also my programs and next building also, try to build a kind of new identity, ASEAN feeling. I'm not sure if one of you, for example, one day traveling to Europe, and then some people, the British, for example, ask you, "Hey, where are you from? Who are you?" What you're going to answer? From Indonesia. I'm Indonesia, right? I'm Indonesia, from Indonesia. Are you from Malaysia? No. Malaysia is, you see? Can we say something where are you from? From ASEAN. And the young generation in Europe, some of them say, I'm not sure, are you from Europe? Yeah. Germany. What do you think about the European so far? Yeah? It's great, right? That's right. But what happened to British now, right? A bit different, yeah? I think that's a good. You have a kind of, what do you call it? Youth parliaments, yeah? European youth parliament and so on, okay? So this is why I think one of the effort to solve the problem of the existence of strong national narrow nationalism among the countries in ASEAN by building new identity. Now, how to build this kind of new identity is not easy. This will take time, of course, long process. One of them is by connects all level of the societies one another. So, people connectivity is one of the strategic effort actually, to build this kind of narrow nationalism. I mean, one day we'll be very much, happy to hear, for example, if the Malaysian people coming here, oh, how are you, brother and sister? It's very interesting. Yeah, it happened when you are somewhere. I was in German for a couple of times in Freiburg. Yeah, and then, as ASEAN people living in a small city, but it's a very nice city, it's a very green one. It's not easy to see or to meet the ASEAN people. And then suddenly there's a guy, wow, this is my brother. Hey, hello, brother. Where are you from? Indonesia? No, I'm Malaysia. Oh, no problem. But when you are here, where are you? Malaysia. And then there's a kind of, unhappy about it, It's what happened when Indonesians, in Malaysia, Indon and so on. There's a kind of stereotyping. But when you are somewhere, it's much easier for you to, identify yourself with a more common identity. I used also in New York, if you look at the United Nations building, this is very common when the ASEAN diplomat, sit together, they're very friendly each other, during homework and so on. But the fact, when you're back to Indonesia, they're talking about, oh, we got a problem, Ambalat with Malaysia and so on, right? That's the problem, yeah? So, new identity. This is, I think, the effort by the ASEAN by establishing 3 pillars of ASEAN security community and so on. As I said before, we didn't know. And then from Atmajaya, current corruption, right? Again, this third question also relates to the sovereignty, right? Narrow nationalism. Most of the countries in regions claim that the problem of the corruption is my own domestic affair. There is no legal right for the other country to intervene. The fact is we have a kind of cooperation, for example, exchange information about the blah blah, that's okay. But this is about what happened between the Indonesian and Singapore, right? There's a lot of Indonesian corruptors played to Singapore, and then it's not easy for Indonesians now to all banks, they put their money in Singapore. They got a problem there. They have a different legal systems. They have a kind of concept of sovereignty, legal sovereignty, and so on. So this was not easy so far for me. Yeah, but yes, there are kind of cooperation in terms of maybe technical things, like as I said before, maybe diplomatic, cooperation, let's say extraditions, cooperation between one country to another. But it's, once again, it depends on how important the issue for one country to another. For Singapore, I think the issue of corruption is, some, especially money from Indonesia, put there is a very important one. Yeah, but we are, for Indonesia, have a different view as well. So I think this is the problem. We need time to create what, as I said before, ASEAN as a community. That feeling that we are ASEAN nation means that's kind of share, political, legal system, and so on, right? Which is based on the awareness that what happened in your country will be, affects my country as well, and so on. That we are part of the problem. So I think that's all.
Hello, sir. My name is Jehan. I'm from Universitas Gadjah Mada. You've been said earlier that non-interference is an important concept in the security community. However, is there any moments or possibilities that a domestic affair in one country can influence the region as a whole, or even one of other countries' domestic affairs? If that happens, is it still inappropriate for them to interfere? I mean, it affects their own country, even if they know the solution of the problem. Thank you.
I think that's a good question too. Look, there are a lot of criticisms on the implementation of the ASEAN values or ASEAN way, either from Western experts, or the ASEAN experts as well, and practitioners as well. Some people say the principle of non-interference is not good to, to develop this kind of ASEAN community in the three pillars. This is kind of obstacles, rather than positive factor. They talk about again, how can you then allow, for example, dictators, leaders in one country, to lead the country without any reminding and so on by the other member of ASEAN. If any problem with one country, as I said before, it will influence the stability and security of the other country as well. So, non-interference, some people say it is a kind of negative principle rather than positive one to the establishment of the ASEAN community. But the other experts say no. It's a good principle, but in the implementations, the countries in the ASEAN needs more creative rather than straight on the non-interventions concepts as written in the ASEAN Charter, for example. Now, if you look at what happened in the last, let's say, 10 years, the fact is non-interference principle is not, implemented is not in the original ways of the concept. There are a lot of creativity actually. There is dynamism in the implementation of the principle. I'll give you an example. When there is a problem of the Rohingya in Myanmar, right? It's not easy for the ASEAN countries, member states, to do or to interference in that kind of issue, simply because Myanmar government at the time claimed this is our own domestic affair. It's not easy. While ASEAN way, unlike, let's say, United States, for example, launched what's so-called the, sanction, for example, right? Blockades and so on. But no. But on that issues, Indonesian Vice President Yusuf Kala, at that time, was not, was already, after the his first terms of vice president, he was the chief of the Red Cross of Indonesia institution, right? Palang Merah Indonesia. And then using that kind of institution, using the language of humanitarian action, Yusuf Kala went to Myanmar, did a kind of dialogues with the leader there, and then the result is quite good. Indonesians, allowed to give a lot of aids, for example, food for the Rohingya people. I think this is one of the example of the Indonesian, the implementation of non-interference principle with more creative. In the case of Indonesian and Malaysia conflict as well, in the Sipadan Ligitan, you know about that? Well, you can imagine, if the Sipadan Ligitan issue happened during the Sukarno era, what you were going to happen, you think, at that time? War, right? You know the character of Sukarno at the time, right? Go to hell with your aids and blah, blah, blah. Inggris kita linggis, Amerika kita setrika, right? Malaysia kita ganyang, and so on. But the fact during the Suharto, SBY, we can maintain that kind of situations in a status quo. Instead of using a kind of force, we put this kind of issue to the International Tribunal, Mahkamah Internasional. The result is not really happy about Indonesia, simply because the decision say, yes, the Sipadan Ligitan is a part of Malaysia territory. Okay, but at least by putting this kind of issue into the International Tribunal, we have to, the first one, we, avoiding this kind of losing face, in international politics. We know that Sipadan Ligitan is not our territory, since the beginning, everybody knows about it. So some people say, I'm sorry, a bit more, yeah. We are not missing the area of territory, but feel to have this kind of territory. The second one, we successfully prevent the use of force, in solving the problem. Yeah. So I think non-intervention actually must be understood in the current situation from the more flexible, in creative perspective. I think so. Thank you so much for the questions. I'm very happy to share my knowledge and experience with you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dafri Agussalim, for the lecture and also the sharing session.